Throwing me off. I keep pointing in the wrong direction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg, and today I am speaking with Rachel West and Dr. Sharma of Create Fertility Center on behalf of Egg Helpers. This webinar is intended to provide you with general information on how to select an egg donor, both from a medical and legal perspective. And we do make the disclaimer that this is not to be misconstrued or used as medical or legal advice as you are going forward and building your family. I also have recently begun to sort of put my biases out there. As an egg donor agency owner, we really believe in egg donation in all kinds of ways that it comes to be. I myself have also been an egg donor many times, as have my 3 adult children. So those are my sort of disclaimers and biases. So welcome. Rachel, if you could tell us a little bit about your practice and how it relates to egg donation, that would be great.
Hi, everybody. I am Rachel West. I am one half of Embry and West LLP. So I work with my partner, Ellen Embry. Together, we are Western Canada's sort of largest surrogacy and fertility law firm. So we manage hundreds of files a year with respect to egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, and surrogacy, as well as parentage questions that occur after a birth. We have been doing this for a very long time, I think collectively several decades, but together it's sort of sitting in the 15-year range. And we just love every piece of the practice that involves building families and helping people overcome fertility concerns or family building challenges.
Amazing. Thank you. And Dr. Sharma, if you can talk about your vast experience and how you support those building their families through egg donation.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me today, as always, Leah. So, my name is Prati Sharma. I am a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist. So, I work on the medical side to help people who are interested in building their family in various ways. I always, I couldn't agree with you more, Rachel, that we're in this incredible reproductive age where building a family is possible almost for anyone if we just think outside of the box. And I see third party reproduction using an egg donor, gestational surrogate, or a sperm donor or embryo donation as these sort of outside of the box ways to have a family, to build a family in a non traditional way. And, I think it's amazing that we're able to work together with people like yourself to help patients conceive and build their families. So, as I said, I'm a REI. I've been practicing in Toronto for 15 years. I immigrated over from New York City, where I trained as a fertility specialist, and I've been practicing at Create for 15 years. I feel lucky to be part of a program and a clinic that really supports and fosters third party reproduction. And so I definitely had a full range of experience treating patients who require an egg donor or surrogate. And sometimes it's not easy to make that decision to move on. And so part of it is really talking to patients, understanding what their wishes are, and educating them about this process because sometimes they just don't know. And so I find that part really incredible. And, I always say to patients, once they make it to the other side and they go that route, I've never had a patient come back and say, oh, no, I don't want those kids. So, it is really incredible what we can do. And I really love helping and assisting patients, have their families. And, I couldn't be more grateful to work with people from agencies like yourself, Leah, who really have, a different lens and the experience of recruiting these egg donors and surrogates, and people like yourself, Rachel, who explore the legal aspect. So it's really a team approach.
Amazing. Thank you. So I'll ask you, Dr. Sharma, and then I'll ask you, Rachel, what makes from your work lens, what makes a good egg donor?
Yeah, I mean, from the medical lens, what makes a good egg donor? So we know that a basic reproductive fact is that as a woman gets older, her eggs get older. She has less eggs to work with and less good quality eggs. And as you age, there are more chromosomal abnormalities in the egg. So consequently, any fertility treatment you do, like IVF, egg extraction, creating embryos, is going to be more successful the younger you are and the healthier eggs you have. So typically, our ideal candidate for an egg donor is between the ages of 18 and 30. One might think 18-year-olds are actually the best, but there's lots of data to suggest that like middle range of 22 to 27, say, is probably the best range, because when you're very, very young, you have a whole bunch of eggs, but you have a whole bunch of good eggs and a whole bunch of bad eggs. You kind of weed them out a little bit between 20, 22, and 27. Plus, women who are a little bit older potentially have the mental capacity to do the injections, go through the IVF treatment, and be cognizant of what they're doing, and follow the pretty intense instructions to do IVF maybe a little bit better. As an egg donor approaches 30, 32, 34, 35, it doesn't mean they're not going to be a good egg donor, but the viability or their health of their eggs might not be as good. So once we have a donor who's within those age parameters, we look to make sure they're medically healthy. So no major medical issues that would be a contraindication to egg donation. And we screen them. We do medical screening tests predominantly to look at their egg health, their ovarian reserve, and this involves blood work and a pelvic ultrasound to make sure we can access those ovaries, that there's a good follicle count, that they have good fertility hormone levels, which predominantly includes the AMH egg fertility test. We also want to make sure they have a healthy family history, because they're transmitting their genetics to the intended parents' embryos. And so we look at their family history. We do genetic screening on most of the egg donors to make sure they don't carry any hereditable disorders that can result in genetic burden to the child. We check on their medications to make sure those are not detrimental to their fertility. We have them undergo psychological counseling so that they understand that it is their genetic material that's going to be used to create embryos for another couple. We do a toxicology screen to make sure that they're not using any illicit substances. So all of this composes their medical and their psychological screening. And then it's a match process. So intended parents are looking for an egg donor that fits their wish list. So whether that be height, weight, eye color, hair color, some people are really strict about the religion or the specific area they're from. And so an intended parent makes their wish list and decides from that what egg donor will be suitable for them.
Excellent, thank you. And Rachel, from a legal perspective, who in Canada can donate, age or any other sort of criteria that is important legally to look at?
Yeah, so anyone in Canada who has eggs, ova, is able to donate, but they obviously have to meet the medical criteria of the clinic. I would say that anybody, like our favorite donors are stable and excited. Those are the two things that I would sort of describe a donor as. So psychologically stable, able to pass screening and to fully sort of commit to the process, because as Prathi said a minute ago, like it is a commitment, able to commit to that process, excited about committing to the process, because as a donor goes through, there are steps. There's the medical screening, but there's also the legal agreement and things like that. So we want to be sure that they have capacity. So a 21-year-old is a good start, because that they've got legal capacity to enter into an agreement, and they are also in that wonderful sort of uptick that Dr. Sharma has just described, which I didn't actually know about, that there is sort of over 18 or over that 21 age is ideal. So stable in their situation and their desire to do this, stable from a psychological perspective, and then excited or invested in the process, right? So willing to go through all of those steps, and really somebody that is able to give their informed consent. So when we talk to them about what the consequences are now, whether those are physical consequences, emotional consequences, but also about the consequences 5 years from now, 10 years from now, being able to look ahead at their lives and making sure that this is something that they will feel good about throughout. And I think that's where wonderful agencies, wonderful clinics come in, because you are able to talk through those things with them as well, and have already had those conversations by the time a donor comes to us. And those are a really critical piece of the puzzle for us.
And when a donor comes to you and says, I'm going to be an egg donor, what types of things legally do you talk about? If it's is there a difference between the conversation around a known egg donor versus anonymous egg donor? Like, what does that look like?
So there are, but a lot of those conversations have already been had at the agency level, like on the known and at the psychological screening level, on the known or the anonymous piece. Do you want me to answer that from the perspective of donor counsel or from the perspective of IP counsel or intended parent counsel?
Yeah,
Because
maybe from intended parents, because they're the ones that'll be really sort
yeah,
of probably
the
watching this
conversation
webinar.
is very different, right? So
Okay.
from an intended parent perspective, the conversation about a contract, I always say there's sort of four key aspects to a donor contract as far as the IPs are concerned. So the number one is that she accepts all risks associated with the donation. So she understands that there are physical, psychological, and legal aspects here that she is agreeing to and cannot later turn around and sue those intended parents irrespective of. Okay. Number two is going to be communication. Are the intended parents and the donor on the same page with respect to communication and what that looks like? So whether it is a known donation or an anonymous donation, and for certain intended parents coming from certain countries, you need a known donation. It is critically important that you are sure about the laws in your country or speak to legal counsel about the law in your country. Do I require a known donor, or do I have the option of anonymous, semi-known, or known? So those are a big piece of the puzzle, is determining that. A third piece is this ongoing communication piece. So whether or not it's an anonymous donation, even in anonymous donation, we want to set an ability for the intended parents to seek more genetic or medical information from that donor in the future if their child develops something that was not already identified in that donor's sort of medical or genetic history. And we want them to be able to obtain further information if necessary. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're following the law here in Canada with respect to donor profile and reimbursable expenses. Those are the critical pieces of the puzzle for our agreement. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. We'll talk about the donor's protocol, the fact that she has to follow the doctor's advice, how she's going to take care of her body, all of that. But the four key aspects are those ones as far as we're concerned.
And everyone has a contract. Like our suggestion is, always have a contract, always have those clauses around, reaching back for that medical information. And without that, I really think that would be tricky to find. So
the contract gives you two benefits, right? It gives you certainty on a go forward basis, which is really important. We've already sort of agreed and discussed, and I've promised that I will continue to provide that information. But one of the things that a contract provides that most people don't think of it for this purpose, but it gets you to ask yourself all of those questions and make sure you're aligned on those topics before you move forward. Because these are usually, when I'm having a call with intended parents, at least once, if not multiple times during that call, I'll hear the comment, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, we do want to do this, or we do want to. So that tells me that had they moved ahead without a contract, one of those key topics wouldn't have been touched on. They wouldn't have considered it because they're thinking about right now. They're not thinking about 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. And so our job is to identify those things, get everybody on the same page today so that expectations are clear and we can all meet our obligations going forward.
Excellent. And Dr. Sharma, how do you balance intended parents' desire to have a ton of eggs out of sheer ignorance, really, of them just not knowing that, I think there's this idea out there that people want their donor to have 100 eggs so they have all the chances. How do you balance that with also being the doctor for the donor and keeping her safe and educating everyone on what is best, how many eggs, how many embryos? If you could just talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. I think this is an excellent question. It's sort of like the pink elephant in the room, right? So, I will never, and you know this very well from knowing this, I never shy away from the fact that I am equally the intended parent's physician as well as the egg donor's physician. I take responsibility for both of them. And so, what does that mean? That means that the procedure has to be medically safe and considerate for both parties. And so when I see an intended parent in consultation who is moving on with egg donation, from the beginning, I'm very clear, and the data actually supports this, that the best IVF success rates and outcomes are from IVF cycles where 15 to 25 eggs are retrieved. And so that is really the target number that I talk about in egg donation cycles. I mean, I am clear that these are young, healthy egg donors with good ovarian reserve. And so it is not unusual for them to be on the higher end at 25, 26, 27. But I can tell you that in my egg donors who make 18 eggs, they will often have 18 eggs retrieved, 18 mature, and 17 fertilized, and 10 embryos, because that is truly the sweet spot to get 15 to 25 eggs. And our IVF laboratory environment and our extended culture media for blastocyst culture, and the fact that we're doing genetic testing of embryos for the most part, we are producing healthy, viable embryos that have a really good implantation rate. And most people want 2 kids, let's say on average, maybe occasionally 3 kids. And so a cycle where you have 18 to 25 eggs has a very high likelihood of yielding good enough embryos for that. And let's not downplay the fact that the more eggs you make, the higher your estrogen level, the higher risk of hyperstimulation. Now, like, I'll be honest and say that we've basically uh, eradicated OHSS even with high egg yields due to our protocols, but that is not a license to get 100 eggs. You will definitely be more bloated. You'll definitely have more side effects. You're not going to feel as good. You're going to feel bloated for a longer amount of time after you do the egg retrieval. Your success rate might not be as good, and there'll be a ton of extra embryos left over that a couple can really struggle with, or an individual or an intended parent can really struggle with in terms of what to do with those remaining embryos. And if you look at the data, there are so many abandoned embryos in North America, so many. And those are filling up our storage tanks. They're basically being abandoned and people are not even coming back for them. We don't have, and Rachel, you can speak to this, there's no rules as to when you can discard embryos without a patient's consent. So what are we doing? We have these storage tanks filling up with embryos. They're moving to an external site sometimes, and it's just all of these embryos sitting around and not being used. Like, one might arguably say patients can donate them, but we all know sitting here that patients have a really tough time with that. I would love if they would all do that, because that would be win-win for everyone, but it's not necessarily true. And so I would much rather stimulate a donor twice if we need more embryos, in the rare case that you need more embryos for a third or fourth child, or if for some reason that egg donor doesn't do as well with her initial stimulation, because some people do have a paradoxical response. I would much rather stimulate her a second time than retrieve uh, uh, too many eggs. So I think the end all be all to this is transparency and honesty, and practicing good medicine is really important on both sides, both for the egg donor and for the intended parent, and for achieving optimal success.
We get this question a lot. Should I pick an egg donor with the same blood type as mine if I'm going to be carrying the baby? And is picking an egg donor with the same blood type going to be able to keep this secret?
Yeah. Well, so that's a two-part question. The first part is, do you need to pick someone with the same blood type? And absolutely you don't for an egg donor or a surrogate or a sperm donor.
Okay.
And this was proven in the initial studies on egg and embryo donation, where rabbits were actually had embryos flushed out of their uterus and they were transferred to a different rabbit. And we proved that there's an immune sort of protection in the uterus. So you can actually have embryos that are not related to yourself at all, and there will be immune acceptance of those embryos. So it's not going to improve your pregnancy rates if you pick an egg donor who has the same blood type as you. Now, if you're an intended parent that's carrying and you're Rh negative, your blood type is negative, and you pick up Rh positive donor, or if you have a partner that's Rh positive, you'll still have to get this shot called RhoGAM. It's not a big deal at all. So again, no need to choose same blood types. Now, the second part of your question about disclosure, and let's say your child finds out that they're a blood type that wasn't inherited from the mother or father. I mean, look, that's not the only way your child is going to find out. There are many, many other ways your child might find out. And I think we all know the literature and the data suggesting that early disclosure to a child about the origins of their birth are better for child development. I mean, I won't claim to be a psychologist, but I appreciate the data and the fact that you don't want your 18-year-old finding out later. It's probably better to tell them when they have the wherewithal to be able to understand it. So I think the blood type is not a medical issue, and I certainly wouldn't choose the same blood type purely for disclosure purposes. Although, listen, being ethnic, I have a a fair number of patients who choose not to disclose. And, that's not any right of mine. We can only provide the information, but I fully respect intended parents' autonomy if they choose not to disclose.
I think it
Absolutely.
is. Yeah, I think it is important though for us at the legal step to have that conversation when clients are choosing anonymous or known, or and considering those future plans. It's really important for us as lawyers to remind intended parents that there really is no such thing as anonymity anymore.
Yes.
When you can buy kits online and just do a quick swab and find out who your relatives are, it's really important that honesty leads, because exactly as Dr. Sharma pointed out, people are going to find out one way or another. And it might be in grade 9 biology class when they do that sort of square, the genetic square. Well, my mom's a B plus and my dad's a whatever. B positive, B minus, whatever. And how is it possible that I have this blood type? Maybe they're going to find out at that stage, but I think we just need to be particularly aware that
Yes,
as of right now, it's possible to find out, and who knows, in 20 years, what the technology will allow for. So it's important. Honesty is a really big piece of the puzzle, I think. And I respect individuals who want to wait or maybe don't feel comfortable with it, and just hope that they kind of, once they have that comfort that they are the parent, that they can really evolve into a fully honest relationship.
Well, and we are shocked all the time when parents who were very adamant about an anonymous donation come back once they've had their child and say, hey, I'd really like to contact that person. And, my own personal experience this last year, a year and a half ago, I was contacted through doing 23andMe by someone who was donor conceived through my eggs, who didn't know they were donor conceived.
Wow.
And it was really unfortunate because they, now have this sort of difficulty with their parents who, weren't upfront with them. And it was a different time 20 years ago as well. But I think, known versus anonymous versus open ID in the future. I mean, I think just really bringing yourself forward as an intended parent and really having that conversation. I always say to people when they're picking a donor, if you're partnered, both go in, log into the database, pick your top 5, right? Because it can bring up things, especially for intended moms, when there's, your spouse is there looking at these younger women, picking them, the mother of his child, right? So go off separately, and 9 times out of 10, people pick the exact same people.
Oh, wow.
And then once you've done that, write down on that piece of paper separately, known, anonymous, semi-known, and just switch the papers, before you have the conversation. Because when you see someone crumbling in front of you, it's a lot different when making a decision than if you're making it just, this is what ideally I would like, and I'm up to negotiate it with you or through our therapist or whoever. So I think there's lots to unpack there. And what I would say is just really to, I guess the invitation is to really just be gentle with yourselves, intended parents, as you're looking at this, because there's no one way. And you know what? Your kid is a teenager. I got 5 kids, 3 have gone through the teenage years. They're gonna hate you at some point for something. So like this, if this
cheers
is the
to
thing,
that.
Guaranteed.
If this is the thing.
Guaranteed.
And Dr. Sharma, I know you only have a few more minutes with us, but I have to ask you this because we did some number crunching of our donors in the last 5 years. And we saw, basically an identical success rate in first-time donors versus experienced donors. And listen, we keep hearing from intended parents, my doctor says to pick someone who's done this a bunch of times. And is that medical, or is that like, we know she's going to do the thing?
Look, everyone's different, right? And so I won't claim to say that my medical advice is the same as every other fertility doctor out there, but there's no data to suggest a repeat donor does better than a new donor. Again, it boils back down to age and ovarian reserve testing.
Okay.
A young patient with good ovarian reserve has an equal chance of responding to ovarian stimulation if you're giving the proper dosing, and she's a medically screened egg donor. I think it gives intended parents some like psychological stress relief to see that an egg donor has donated before and made a bunch of embryos. Or if an intended parent, let's say, chooses a new egg donor, and for some reason, there's some proportion of all patients that are going to just crash with STIM. And it's a very low percentage of young egg donors, right? Because these are optimal candidates. But yes, there might be an egg donor who does very poorly in terms of her yield, or you do the IVF and the egg quality looks bad, the embryo quality looks bad, intended parents are not willing to try her again with a different protocol. Then I think, again, psychologically, to choose a donor that's proven and you can use the prior protocol will give them some comfort level. But I am completely honest with my intended parents. I say choose the donor that's best for you within these parameters, because these are the genetics that you're passing along. And so I see no difference between a 25-year-old new egg donor with normal fertility parameters or a 26-year-old proven egg donor who's done it a couple of times. And I will even go one step further, and we've talked about this many times before. Sometimes, there are the egg donors that are what we call repeats, and they come in 4, 5, 6 times, with ASRM saying the maximum number of stimulations should be in and around 6 stimulations. And they are just strong egg responders and they do really well every time. But I would say that as you get past 3 to 4 egg donations, there is a little bit of scar tissue that forms around the ovaries. You get a little bit resistant to the drugs and need higher doses. So sometimes I see the opposite, where repeat egg donors don't do as well in subsequent cycles. So I feel like up to 3 prior donations is fine to choose. And I have no discriminatory zone between a new egg donor and a repeat egg donor if they have normal ovarian reserve parameters.
Okay, next I have 2 other questions. Hopefully you still have a couple minutes.
Sure.
The next question is, if a donor comes forward and they were adopted and don't have any sort of familial history, does the genetic testing that you do on egg donors, is that enough, or is that something
Is this
separate?
comprehensive? So that's tricky, right? Because there's lots of family history that's not genetic, right? You could have
Okay.
a strong family history of mental illness, and there's no one gene that passes along with mental illness. And the expanded carrier screen that we do on egg donors, it's improving, but it's only looking for genetic disorders, and it's looking only for recessive disorders. And before it was 300 and now it's 500. So there's no way you're going to screen for everything under the sun. But would I say that a donor is a deal breaker and she can't be used or put on your roster or screened, or, a possible egg donor if she is adopted and doesn't have a family history? No, I wouldn't say that. Because remember, if you are a heterosexual female or you're a lesbian female or a homosexual male and you're choosing your partner, when you meet someone, I always say this to patients who ask the prototypic blood type question. I'm like, do you meet your partner or go out on a date and say, hi, nice to meet you, what's your blood type? Right? You don't.
I always say the same thing.
I don't actually think I know my husband's blood type, and I've had 3 kids with him. So yes, I was just telling a patient this today, that there is a certain amount of trust that comes with third-party reproduction, but we're only ever improving in what we can test for, but it's not the end all be all. And the other thing I say to patients, it's nature versus nurture, right? We know that the environmental part of raising a child or building a family, and this is proven in the twin studies where twins were separated and they grew up in 2 different, completely diverse households, they grew up very differently and they're totally different people. So nature versus nurture is also a huge part of this. And I think it's a very low risk or low chance that by using an adopted donor that you're going to miss a strong family history of breast cancer and a gene that's going to pass along.
Excellent. And Rachel, when you are talking to intended parents and they're saying I want to pick this egg donor, but I'm just not sure, is there any advice, given that you've done this, hundreds, I would say thousands of times now, that you give to intended parents as we're kind of wrapping up, that you would say is super important to consider?
It's very similar to what Dr. Sharma said. And that is, when you are picking your partner, you're not picking them based on their genetic material. And so what makes this world a beautiful, wonderful place is that the children and the people we're creating is not in such a controlled environment. And, with the exception of major genetic issues or concerns, there is something special about people being different and imperfect, and it is okay. And the majority of people walking this earth were not perfectly selected for their genetic material. I'm sure Like I wouldn't have picked my husband for his genetic material or his medical background. Uh, but here we are, right? And so I think for me, what I talk to my clients about is feeling good. And I know that that's like a very nebulous term, but feeling good about who they've chosen. So both of them can be excited about their choice. If it is going to be a known relationship, feeling good about what we've agreed about how we're going to maintain this relationship or not maintain it. Feeling good and comfortable about who you're choosing, but also the people who are supporting you through the process. I always say you're building your team with your lawyer and your clinic and your agency. And so being intentional about building that team. But I think when we're talking about this stuff, the vernacular that we use has such a strong influence on our clients. And so when we use words like proven donor or experienced donor, we are automatically placing a higher emphasis on her value. We're saying that she has higher value. And I think what Dr. Sharma is saying is so correct. Like it actually isn't necessarily true that proven means something better or more. And so it's important to when I'm speaking with my clients, to talk to them about, what the limits of that word mean. That it doesn't mean that a donor that hasn't done it before has more risks or is less likely to be successful, because those are things people hear those words, especially people where English is their second language. They hear words like proven and experienced, and then they're assigning a value to that. So we just have to be really conscious about when we use that we make it clear what we mean by that.
Absolutely. And I just had one last question, Dr. Sharma, that just came in. Someone asked, how is it not a conflict if you're the donor's doctor and the intended parent's doctor? And I guess, Rachel, the same question, like, how is it not a conflict?
Well, you look, like, I guess you could think about it as a perceived conflict, but what I see is it's mutually beneficial. So it's win-win for all, right?
Okay.
And so I would actually arguably say that if you are not the doctor for both of them, it can result in more of a conflict, because this way you have both interests at the table and you can manage both of them appropriately. And for medical care, it's always good if the care is not fragmented. And so,
yeah, can you imagine if you were fighting over protocols?
Yeah,
like IP doctor wants this protocol and donor, it doesn't make sense from that perspective. Yeah. From a legal perspective, we do see a conflict. So anytime, the legal answer on Dr. Sharma's answer is it's when your interests are not aligned that a conflict arises. And so in a donor and an IP medical scenario, their interests are aligned. So there really isn't a conflict there. From a legal perspective, there is absolutely the possibility of a conflict, and there should be a consideration for having independent legal advice on both sides of that agreement, because people's interests are not the same when they're negotiating the benefits or risks associated under an agreement. So we would only act on both sides of a contract in very, very specific and limited circumstances, like we have a sister donating to a sister and they don't want a legal agreement at all. Then we can sort of sit down with both of them and talk them through that if they're comfortable with it. But yeah, there is for sure a possibility of a legal conflict at the legal point. I don't see one in the same way at the medical phase.
Amazing.
You said that so eloquently, Rachel. You kind of verbalized the definition of conflict, like beautifully compared to me. So
words matter.
I will wrap this up by saying, if you are an intended parent watching this webinar or listening to it as a podcast later on, please reach out to us to get Rachel's information, Dr. Sharma's information. And as you are searching for an egg donor agency or even looking independently, I would leave you with this advice. A contract is vital. A great fertility clinic who has a great third-party program that has counseling available to the donor should she need it, have counseling available to you should you need it, have more than one doctor in the building just in case they have a family emergency and you or your donor need to speak to someone about the medical process. So important, which is why we at Egg Helpers partner with these guys. And read the consents at the fertility clinic. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of embryos that are being left in tanks. We are addressing that. I'll put a little plug in. My daughter Sarah is starting and working with me on embryo donor program for known embryo donation that crosses all barriers, that allows for same-sex couples, that allows for those using surrogates. It'll be the first of its kind in Canada that is as comprehensive as it's going to be. And, you know, we as an agency have fallen into that trap. How many eggs, how many embryos? And really, has a pregnancy been achieved? Has a healthy live birth resulted? And are all parties feeling supported throughout the journey? So I'll leave it with that. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. It's great always to talk to you. Look forward
It
to
was
it
a
again.
pleasure. Thank
It
you.
was super fun. Thank you all for having me. And
Yes,
Rachel, so
thank
nice
you.
to see you.
Yeah, same. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.